I always thought the cracks in our family were small and easy to ignore until the earthquake exposed them all at once. As our home crumbled, so did the silence we had lived in for years. In the rubble, we didn't just find survival, we found each other again. It was supposed to be just another Saturday, the kind where nothing really happens, and everything feels painfully familiar. I woke up to the usual muffled argument between my mom and dad, their voices seeping through the thin walls like smoke. I didn't need to hear the words. I already knew the topic. Money. I dragged myself out of bed, still wearing yesterday's hoodie, and made my way into the kitchen. Mom was standing at the sink, hands buried in soapy water, her movements sharp and frustrated. Dad was sitting at the dining table with his laptop open, pretending to work, but I could see he was really watching news videos on mute. They barely looked at each other. The electricity bill was due 3 days ago, Mom said flatly, not looking up. I'll get to it, Dad replied without even blinking. I've been busy. Busy? You come home and lock yourself in the room. You're not even present, Raj. That's because I'm trying to keep us afloat, Anita, he snapped, a little louder now. I rolled my eyes and quietly grabbed a slice of toast before slipping out of the kitchen. The smell of tension was worse than the burnt toast. In the living room, my little brother Araviv was sitting cross-legged on the floor, building what looked like a spaceship out of Lego blocks. He was humming some made-up tune to himself, completely absorbed in his own little world. He always did that, escaped into his imagination when things got loud around the house, which was often. Hey, genius, I said, nudging him with my foot. What are you building? He smiled without looking up. A rocket that can fly away from here? I laughed. Can I come with you? He looked at me for a second, then nodded solemnly. Only if you don't bring your phone. I smiled, but it faded quickly as I walked away. He wasn't wrong. My phone had become my shield, my distraction. I spent more time scrolling through other people's perfect lives than living my own. It was easier than dealing with my parents, or worse, trying to talk to them. I went back to my room and curled up on the bed, scrolling through Instagram stories. People were posting about vacations, brunches, and happy family outings. Meanwhile, my own family was falling apart in the next room. We weren't broken, exactly. We were just disconnected, like 4 puzzle pieces that didn't quite fit together anymore. Sometimes I wondered when it started. When did we become a group of individuals just coexisting instead of a family? I remembered when we used to eat dinner together, laugh over silly jokes, and go on long drives with music blasting from the speakers. But somewhere along the way, maybe after Dad lost his old job, or when Mom started working 2 shifts, or when I became a teenager and decided they didn't understand me, we drifted. Now, dinner was something you microwaved and ate alone. Laughter was rare, and long drives were a thing of the past. Arav was the only one who tried. He'd ask Mom to play board games. He'd knock on Dad's door with drawings in hand. He even wrote me little notes sometimes and slipped them under my door. But we were all too busy, too tired, too wrapped up in our own stress to really see him, or each other. Around noon, the power flickered off again. Mom groaned loudly from the kitchen. Great, just great. Probably a blown fuse, Dad muttered, not moving. No, Raj, it's the bill, the one you said you'd pay. I grabbed my headphones, trying to tune them out. Araviv, sensing the argument was about to escalate, tiptoed into my room and sat beside me. I gave him a half-hearted smile and turned down my music. Well, do they always fight? He whispered. I sighed. Because they don't know how to talk anymore. He nodded like he understood. Maybe he did, in his own way. Outside, the sky was strangely gray. Birds were flying low in odd formations. There was a weird stillness in the air that made the hairs on my arms stand up. I noticed it, but didn't think much of it. Honestly, it felt like the weather was matching the mood inside our house. Tense, heavy, unpredictable. Mom slammed a cupboard. Dad muttered something under his breath. Arava stared at his hands. And I sat there, feeling like everything in our family was being held together by nothing more than routine and silence. We were a family in name, but in reality we were strangers, sharing space, moving in separate directions. What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that the earth was about to shake us out of that silence, that in just a few short hours everything we thought was stable would crumble, and we'd be forced to face what really mattered. But for now, all I felt was the weight of everything unsaid. They say you never forget the sound. For me, it wasn't just one sound. It was a layered orchestra of fear. Windows rattling, dishes crashing, the deep groan of wood and concrete straining under pressure, and worst of all, the terrified screams of people you love. It happened just after lunch. Mom had stopped arguing and gone to her room for a nap, slamming the door behind her. Dad had finally moved from his laptop to fix the fuse box, or maybe just to get away. Arav was back in the living room, putting the finishing touches on his rocket. I was scrolling through TikTok, watching people dance and laugh, far away from this version of reality. Then the world shifted. At first, I thought it was a truck passing by. The floor gave a slight jolt, like a hiccup. I looked up from my phone. Arav paused, one hand holding a Lego piece mid-air. "You feel that?" he asked. Before I could answer, the real shaking began. The walls convulsed violently. The floor beneath me rippled like water. I stumbled off my bed as books flew from the shelves. My mirror cracked with a sharp pop. I heard my mother scream from the other room, followed by Dad's voice yelling, "Everyone out! Earthquake!" I didn't even have time to think. My body moved on instinct. I threw open the door and ran down the hallway toward Arav. He was frozen in the middle of the living room, eyes wide, clutching his rocket like it would protect him. "Come on!" I shouted, grabbing his hand. But just as I reached him, a shelf full of photo frames and knickknacks toppled over between us, blocking the path. I stumbled backward, coughing from the dust that filled the air. The house roared. That's the only way I can describe it. It roared, like it was alive and angry. Rav started crying. "Di, help me!" "I'm coming!" I screamed. But the floor split open slightly, cracking tiles and sending a sharp tremor through my legs. I looked behind me. The kitchen ceiling was beginning to collapse. Everything was happening in slow motion, yet way too fast. I turned and ran toward the side door. I needed to get out before the whole house fell. As I burst outside into the open, the noise became a dull rumble behind me. Neighbors were already gathering on the street, eyes wide with panic. Sirens wailed in the distance. Dust clouds rose from multiple houses. But my mind was on one thing. I spun back toward the house, only to see the roof partially caved in over the living room. I couldn't see him anymore. "No, no, no," I whispered. Then I heard Dad shouting my name. He ran up to me, grabbing my shoulders. "Where's Arav?" he demanded, his eyes wild. "Is inside," I choked. "I couldn't reach him. He's in the living room. He was right there." Before I could stop him, Dad pushed past me and ran back into the house. Mom followed seconds later, barefoot and shaking, her eyes searching every inch of the crumbling walls. It felt like a nightmare I couldn't wake up from. People were yelling all around us. A power line had snapped down the street and was sparking wildly. The air smelled like smoke and dust. I stood rooted to the spot, shaking, helpless, as the world I knew disintegrated in front of me. Minutes felt like hours. Then, like a miracle, Dad emerged from the rubble, carrying Arav in his arms. His face was covered in soot and sweat, and his leg was bleeding, but he didn't stop until he laid Arav down safely on the grass. My knees gave out. I crawled over and hugged my brother so tightly he squeaked. "I thought I lost you," I sobbed. "I thought—" "I'm okay," he whispered, his voice thin but real. "You came back." Mom collapsed beside us, pulling us both into her arms. Dad sat down with a groan, clutching his leg. No one spoke for a few seconds. We just breathed. Around us, the chaos continued. Sirens, cries, distant crashes. But in that little moment, we were whole again. Shaken, bruised, terrified, but together. That's when I realized something. When everything started falling apart, we didn't run away from each other. We ran toward each other. We didn't think about the fights, or the silence, or the stress. We only thought about keeping each other safe. That was the beginning of something new. We didn't know how long it would take to rebuild the house, but in that moment, the emotional walls we'd built over years of distance and resentment had started to collapse too. The earthquake had shaken our world, but it also woke us up. We sat there for a long time, my mom, dad, Arav, and me, huddled on the patch of dry grass just outside our broken home. Our hands were dirty, our clothes torn, and our bodies aching in ways we hadn't even begun to process. But we were alive. It was late afternoon by the time the aftershocks stopped. The house was barely standing. Half the roof caved in, deep cracks zigzagging up the walls like scars. The once familiar space we had taken for granted had turned into a shell of what it was. But we didn't have time to grieve the loss of structure. Not yet. We had each other, and that meant everything. Araf lay with his head on my lap, one hand still clutching the broken nose cone of his Lego rocket. His forehead had been bandaged with part of Mom's scarf. He kept drifting in and out of sleep, his little body exhausted from the shock. Dad sat a few feet away, his injured legs stretched out, wrapped in an old towel we'd found. He looked worn out, not just physically, but emotionally, like years of stress had finally caught up with him. I caught him watching us, not just glancing, but really seeing us, maybe for the first time in a long while. "Do you think we'll be able to fix the house?" I asked quietly, my voice rough from all the dust. He didn't answer right away. Then he said, "We'll try, but maybe fixing us comes first." I looked at him, surprised. My dad didn't say things like that. He said things like, "I'm busy," or "Ask your mother." He gave short answers, practical advice, and rarely, if ever, opened up emotionally. But there was something in his voice now, a crack that let something vulnerable peek through. Mom, sitting beside us, didn't say anything for a moment. She just wiped her eyes with the edge of her sleeve. Then she said softly, "I've been so angry, Raj, for months, maybe years, and I didn't know how to say it without making everything worse." Dad looked at her. "You weren't the only one who was angry. I thought I was doing the right thing by working more, earning more. I thought providing was enough." Mom shook her head, looking down. "We needed you, not just your income. We needed your presence." I felt like I was parenting alone. They both fell silent again, and for once, I didn't feel awkward hearing them speak like that. I felt relieved, like someone had finally opened a window and let all the stale air out. Then Mom looked at me. "And you? I know you've been hiding behind your phone, sweetheart, but I see you. I know you feel left out. I know we haven't been there like we should have." I didn't know what to say. A lump formed in my throat. I looked down at Araba's messy curls, gently brushing dust from his hair. "I just stopped trying," I admitted. It felt like no one was listening, so I gave up. I thought if I stayed quiet, stayed out of the way, it wouldn't hurt so much. Dad reached over and placed a hand on my shoulder. "Another surprise. We hear you now. I promise." Something inside me shifted. The anger I'd carried for so long, it didn't disappear, but it softened, like ice melting under sunlight. Suddenly, Arav stirred and opened his eyes. "Is it over?" he whispered. "For now," Mom said, stroking his cheek. He sat up slowly, blinking. "I had a dream the house flew away, but we were all holding hands inside it." I smiled. "Sounds like something you'd build." He grinned, and for a moment, everything felt okay. Later that evening, we were moved to a temporary shelter set up at the local school. The gymnasium had been converted into a sleeping area. Rows of blankets, bottled water, and basic supplies were being handed out. Volunteers bustled around with clipboards, while medics checked on the injured. We were given a corner near the back. It wasn't much, just a few mats and a shared blanket, but it was more than some had. As we settled in, I looked around at the other families. Some were holding each other tightly. Others sat in stunned silence. A few cried openly, without shame. But there was a strange beauty in it, too. A shared sense of survival, of being human. That night, as the four of us lay side by side, closer than we had in years, Dad reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, cracked photo frame. It had survived the collapse, one of the few things that did. It was a picture of us from years ago, smiling on a family picnic. Rob had ice cream all over his face. Mom was laughing. Dad looked younger, lighter. I was holding everyone's hands, standing in the middle. We passed it around in silence. Then Mom whispered, "Maybe we can find our way back to this." And this time, we all believed her. Weeks passed. The tremors had stopped, but the aftershocks lingered. Not in the earth, but in us. We were still in the shelter, though now it felt less like a gym and more like a patchwork community, stitched together by stories and survival. Tents had replaced mats. Temporary kitchens served warm meals twice a day. Schools were slowly reopening in makeshift classrooms. People were rebuilding, one step at a time. Our house, we learned, had been marked as structurally unsafe. It would need major repairs before we could return. That news hit hard, especially for Dad. He'd spent years pouring his savings and his pride into that home. The idea of starting over made his shoulders sag in a way I'd never seen before. But he didn't break. None of us did. Instead, something else began to take root. I saw it in the way Mom helped coordinate meals for the elderly in the shelter, in the way Arav taught younger kids to read using his comic books, in the way Dad, bad leg and all, volunteered to fix broken pipes, doors, anything that could help someone else feel safe again. And in myself, I saw it in small things, sharing my charger with others, comforting kids when their parents were late coming back, even just talking, really talking, with people I once would have ignored. One evening, while the sky glowed orange with sunset, our family sat on plastic chairs outside the shelter. It had become our ritual, watching the sun set together, a moment of peace in all the chaos. Arav was drawing again, this time a 2-story house made of colorful blocks. He pointed to the roof and said, "That's us up there, on the balcony," laughing. Mom leaned over his shoulder. "I love it. Where's the garden?" "Here," he scribbled a green patch, "with sunflowers." I smiled. "Why sunflowers?" "Because they always turn to the light," he said simply. That quiet, wise answer from an 8-year-old hit me harder than anything else had. Maybe that's what we'd been doing all along, turning to the light, even when everything seemed dark. Mom turned to Dad. "The city said we can apply for a temporary housing grant. It won't be much, but it'll help us get a rental while we figure things out." Dad nodded. "It's a start." I could tell he was still struggling, letting go of the house, the life we had. But he was also seeing what we had gained, not in possessions, but in presence, in reconnection. Later that night, I lay awake beside Aravav, staring at the ceiling beams of the gym. The walls around us were still temporary, but the feeling inside me wasn't. We were stronger, not because we'd survived the quake, but because it had shaken something loose, something we needed to let go of. Old anger, distance, silence. We had started over, not just with bricks and plans, but with open hearts. A week later, we moved into a small rental home on the edge of the city, a modest place with 2 bedrooms, a tiny kitchen, and no fancy furniture. The walls were thin. The power flickered when you used the microwave and hairdryer at the same time, but it was ours. And it was enough. The first night there, we ate dinner on the floor, just a simple meal, rice, dal, some pickles. Arav insisted on lighting a tiny candle in the middle, like it was a feast. "To our new home," he declared, raising his juice box like a toast. We laughed and joined him. And as I looked around at my family, my mom smiling for the first time in ages, Dad holding Mom's hand under the table, Arav talking non-stop about how he was going to build his next rocket, I realized something. The earthquake hadn't just taken our house. It had given us back our family. It had reminded us that home isn't about the perfect furniture or big bedrooms. Home is hearing your brother's giggle. It's the warmth of your mother's hug when you've had a bad day. It's your father limping around the kitchen, stubbornly trying to make tea even when you tell him to rest. It's conversations at sunset, shared struggles, unexpected laughter. The simple act of showing up for one another, even when the world shakes. That night, I wrote something in my journal. We lost walls, but we found each other. We may be rebuilding slowly, but what we're creating now, this love, this closeness, is stronger than anything we had before. Home isn't a place, it's us. And that's a truth I'll carry with me for the rest of my life.